Not all stories begin once upon a time, and not all stories happened a long time ago. In fact, this one happened quite recently. It was Halloween night, and a group of young people, dressed in their costumes, had gathered for a party. As usually is the case, they had begun to tell stories designed to scare one another. Eventually the talk came around to the fear that each of them had felt in passing the graveyard on their way to the party. One of the young men said, "You have to make sure that you don't ever stand on a grave at midnight, because if you do, the body will reach up and grab you and pull you down inside." Now one girl, dressed as a princess in a long flowing dress that went all the way down to the floor, said, "Don't be silly. I don't believe in ghosts. I've never seen a ghost, and I wouldn't be afraid to go into the graveyard at midnight and stand on a grave. That's silly superstition." The young man was quite upset that the girl didn't believe what he'd said, and so he dared the young girl, whose name was Trish, to prove this very night that she wasn't afraid to go to the graveyard and at midnight to stand on a grave. As the time was growing late, a group soon left and made their way down toward the graveyard. Before they left, Trish put on her long cloak that was part of her costume, and they worked their way down the street toward the cemetery. As they reached the gate, one of the boys handed Trish a fork from the kitchen. "Here, take this, and when you've stood on the grave, stick it into the ground so that we'll be able to see, and we'll have proof that you did stand on the grave at midnight." Trish left the group at the gate and went inside. In the darkness, for the first time, she began to feel a little bit afraid. Wasn't that a movement she caught out of the corner of her eye? She almost broke then and ran outside, but she was determined to see this through. She walked forward until she found a grave. She stood on the grave. She raised the fork ready to plunge it into the ground when she was certain that she heard a noise behind her. First a sigh, and then a loud moan. And it came from a grave not far away. Now she was sure that she could hear something approaching, moving stiffly and wetly through the darkness. She was too frightened to scream. She plunged the fork into the ground and turned to run, but she was unable. Something had caught hold of her, and she struggled and struggled to gain her freedom. But the more she struggled, the tighter it held her, and now it was tugging at her throat. With a final spasm of terror, she threw herself forward onto the ground, only to feel herself being dragged backward toward the grave. And then there was only blackness. Trish's friends waited outside the gate, and when Trish had not come back in half an hour, they decided that they'd better go in and look for her. Armed with a flashlight, they went into the cemetery.